Imagine a broken world full of broken people led by a leader with selfish ambition. No one is safe, eyes watching everywhere, and all spoken words are heard by unwanted ears. It's risky to walk to a friend's house, but then again, you don't know who your friends are in a world like this. Your safety comes before all else in a society where danger lurks around every corner. While you're living uniform to everyone else and the skies are always seemingly gray, you can't hope but lose hope for a better day. What should you do? What can you do? That is the question everyone finds themselves asking. After all, you're just a simple person suffering from the laws that the before-mentioned leader has enforced to make life better for himself. Can you leave? No, the law forbids it. Can you fight for a change? Well, yes, if you want to die trying. The only other option you seem to have is to stay put and live your life in this sad state of a world. This is life in a dystopian society, harsh, cruel, and nightmarish. A dystopia is defined as a bad place, a place where no one would want to live, a place in which one's rights and freedoms would be gone. Dystopia is created from the Greek prefix dys, meaning bad, harsh, or wrong, and the Greek root topos, meaning place. In fiction like Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, or in movies like The Matrix, the bad place is more than a setting. The dystopia acts as a vehicle for an author's dramatic opinion about the way we live today. In this way, dystopian literature is usually crafted so that it acts as a warning to us to stop what we're doing or face the consequences. Before dystopia, there was utopia, which was coined by Thomas More in his book Utopia in 1516. It is a place, state, or condition that is ideally perfect in respect of politics, laws, customs, and conditions. These utopias try to create ideal societies with peaceful governments, safe environments, access to education, healthcare, and employment, and so forth. If utopias are truly perfect, there would be no conflict, which makes for a relatively boring story. Meanwhile, dystopias have this widespread appeal to audiences because they play off our deepest fears, a loss of liberty, life, and happiness. The first public usage of the word dystopia goes all the way back to John Stuart Mill in 1868. In a speech to the House of Commons, Mill said, "It is perhaps too complimentary to call them utopians. They ought rather to be called dystopian." The idea of dystopian fiction began after historical events such as the Industrial Revolution, World War II, and the Russian Revolution, as well as growing awareness of environmental damage, rapid progress of technology, popularization of capitalistic trends, and fear that the machines could take the power over the men. An author named Yevgeny Zamyatin wrote a novel called We in 1921 that jump-started the dystopian literature game. It set up many of the tropes that would come to dominate the dystopian fiction. These included troubled, unresolved endings and a totalitarian government gone mad. In the 1950s and 60s, war and technology inspired dystopian novels with creations like the first personal computer. The Second World War had also just ended, so authors grew particularly concerned with totalitarian governments' abilities to regulate the arts. In the 70s, 80s, and 90s, dystopian fiction fell off the radar until the 21st century when it skyrocketed with books like The Hunger Games, Divergent, and The Maze Runner. In order to demonstrate the benefits of reading dystopian fiction, some terms must be defined. Totalitarianism is a system of government that is centralized and dictatorial and requires complete subservience to the state. Authoritarianism is the enforcement or advocacy of strict obedience to authority at the expense of personal freedom. Dystopian fiction can teach its readers to be more vigilant citizens of their government and better followers of Christ. People should read these books because it can teach them to become more aware of their government. It can teach young adults to become better citizens. Lastly, people should read dystopian fiction because it can help them grow closer to God. First, reading dystopian literature can raise awareness about a government's potential infringement on human rights. The issue of surveillance is large-scale in the books we read, as well as our day-to-day reality. American whistleblower Edward Snowden says, "Under observation, we act less free, which means we effectively are less free." This is proven to be true in George Orwell's 1984 because the citizens are under constant surveillance using cameras, hidden microphones, and a secret police. In 2013, Edward Snowden, an ex-CIA employee, released classified documents about how the U.S. government was intercepting phone calls and electronic communications. The popular home system, Alexa, has started quite the scandal around the world. Some articles online talk about how Amazon employees are hired to listen into the conversations this system picks up. No matter how private, they are required to record what is said. Overall, 1984 can teach its readers that mass surveillance can be a dangerous part of our political, social, and economic lives, and that we should remain cautious about the possible outcomes it could bring. The world is littered with problems and predicaments, and in the stories people read, they can learn how to go about solving them. In The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins, one major problem is clearly represented: the division between the rich and the poor. While this may not be as clear in our world as it is in Katniss's, it's still there. In the book, Collins shows us the extremity of the problem and demonstrates its disastrous effects. In many dystopian novels, dangerous weather conditions such as the solar flares caused by the sun in James Dashner's The Maze Runner are major problems that characters must face. While our problems with climate change are not this fatal, problems like this in dystopian novels make us think about our current events. Second, people should read dystopian fiction because it can teach young adults how to be better citizens. Voting is both a privilege and a responsibility, and reading about stories where voters have made unwise choices can teach young adults about the consequences of it. In Lois Lowry's The Giver, the citizens voted for their chief elder who made their community into a dangerous place to live. All the rules focus on the idea of sameness and forcing the community to conform to that idea. The government oversees everything in a person's life, from what color they wear to what job they have, and even to who lives and who dies. Voting is an essential part of how we live as a community, and if done poorly, bad leaders can come into power and ruin everything. Without voting, governments get taken over by the wrong people, and unfortunately, the people suffer from it. In a study done in 2015 for the Annenberg Public Policy Center, it was found that nearly a third of Americans cannot name the 3 branches of government, and 4 in 10 Americans believe that the Constitution gives the president the power to declare war. While these statistics are sad, they aren't surprising. Teachers have found that students have learned great amounts of powerful lessons about being a good citizen in their literature classes, with books like The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. We can learn about citizenship from dystopias like The Maze Runner. In this book, we learn that the characters become good citizens by protecting those who cannot protect themselves and fighting for a change. This is also shown in The Hunger Games when Katniss tries to help change how poorly the districts are being treated. Reading these books will help teach young adults how to be better citizens in their societies. In Romans 13:1-13, Paul the Apostle writes this: "Be a good citizen. All governments are under God, insofar as there is peace and order. It's God's order. So live responsibly as a citizen. If you're irresponsible to the state, then you're irresponsible with God, and God will hold you responsible. Duly constituted authorities are only a threat if you're trying to get by with something. Decent citizens should have nothing to fear." Young adults can be taught good citizenship by how essential a Christian worldview is in the books they read. In dystopias, there is no God. The characters and citizens in these books look up to the government leaders for support and guidance. But in most of these books, the government is almost always the bad guy and is always manipulating and teaching the people the wrong things. Since the characters don't have God to look to, they don't have a sense of hope that things will be okay, that as we as Christians do when we undergo hardships. A biblical worldview is a big part of being a good citizen, and young adults can learn how people need it in a fallen world from these books. Lastly, reading dystopian fiction can teach us spiritual lessons like the importance of sacrificial love, courage, and how ordinary people can do extraordinary things. Sacrificial love is a determined act of the will, a resolve to put the welfare of others above our own. It is greatly valued in dystopian literature. Take The Maze Runner, for example. In the end of the 3rd book, Teresa dies by helping an injured Thomas get aboard the helicopter when the city is falling in flames around them. Another example is in The Hunger Games. In the beginning of the book, Katniss offers herself as tribute to the games in order to save her sister from having to compete. The Bible also demonstrates sacrificial love with Jesus dying on the cross for our sins. In 1 Peter 2:24, it says, "He himself bore our sins in his body on the tree, that we might die to sin and live to righteousness. By his wounds you have been healed." We can learn about the value and beauty of sacrificial love by reading dystopian novels, because in these books there is a harsh and ugly backdrop. But when you read about these kind and loving acts of sacrifice, it speaks greater volumes. The power of courage is a very valuable spiritual lesson in dystopian literature. Almost every character demonstrates this. Katniss, Thomas, and Jonas are all very courageous in their books. Katniss by competing in the Hunger Games despite knowing all the risks. Thomas goes into the maze at night to save one of his friends even though he knows that no one had ever gone in and survived the night. Jonas goes against all rules and gives the community back their memories even though he could have been killed. The Bible shows many acts of brave and courageous people as well. For example, Abraham taking his son to be sacrificed, Jesus on the cross, and all of the disciples doing Jesus' mission work knowing how dangerous it is. Courage is demonstrated everywhere, and dystopian literature gives examples of it in the characters as they go on these journeys throughout their books. The world is full of ordinary people who do extraordinary things, and that is a huge part of the characters in these stories. In the beginning, all of them are simply normal people living normal lives. Throughout the book, they show the readers how extraordinary they can become by performing these incredible feats that always have us on the edge of our seats. In The Giver, Jonas is a normal guy living the same life as everyone else until he is given the job of the receiver. This job requires him to receive all of the world's memories from the giver, both the good and the bad. In the end, he must make the decision to give the community back these memories and become the hero he needs to save his community, thus starting his extraordinary adventure. Dystopian literature teaches us these spiritual lessons through the lives of the characters we know and love. When it comes to these books, people could say that Christians should not use dystopian literature as a learning tool because of the dark content that it contains. While most dystopian books do contain dark content, darkness being present in a book does not mean that the content is supporting something dark. The Bible contains dark content, but it is not persuading people to do the dark acts that are committed in it. Instead, it shows hope and gives Christ the glory. For example, when God flooded the earth, that story gives God the glory of erasing the sin from the world and showing hope for a better world for mankind. In The Maze Runner, each obstacle that Thomas and his friends endure gives them hope at reaching the safe haven and finally escaping both the disease and the government trying to kill them. What we can learn from Thomas is that all the darkness and hardships we go through in life should give us hope at reaching God. Some may say, stories are my escape from the real world. I don't want to learn lessons when I read. This is considered escapist literature, when a person reads fiction to get away from worldly problems. However, even escapist literature always has a message. But what is it teaching you? As mentioned, dystopian literature provides many lessons to its readers. Lessons like how to be wary of authoritarianism, spiritual lessons, and why a Christian worldview is important. These messages and others underline the dystopian books we read and teach us valuable information to help us outside of the books. When people hear stories and examples, the lesson behind them always tends to stick with them. That is why teachers use examples when teaching their classes, because the information is embedded in a story and the students gather and remember it in a special way. Researchers show that 70% of what people learn is consumed through storytelling. That is why it is important for people to read these books, because not only are they getting an intriguing story, but they learn even when they do not think they are. By reading dystopian fiction, one can learn how to become more aware of the government's surveillance, possible acts of authoritarianism, and other world problems. It can teach young adults lessons of voting and worldview. Lastly, it can teach spiritual lessons about courage, sacrificial love, and ordinary people performing extraordinary acts. What if the life we knew today, our life, our country, even our city, went to ruin and no one knew what to do? How would we be able to fix it? Would we be able to fix it? People should take into consideration that the words of a book could be the key to saving lives. They just need to turn the page. Thank you.
Thank you, Morgan. Would a God-centered or Christ-centered authoritative government be dystopian or utopian? Why?
Can you repeat the question?
Yes. Would a God-centered or Christ-centered authoritative government be dystopian or utopian? Why? Authoritarian, sorry.
So I talked about how these dystopian novels don't have a God in them. So I would say that it would not be dystopian, considering that all of the books that we read that are of the dystopian genre don't have a God in them. So I would say no.
What would you say to those who do not like dystopian fiction because of its lack of redemption?
I would say that, you don't have to read them. I just think they're interesting and found that that there are benefits from reading them, but people can learn all of these lessons that I've talked about in other ways, not just dystopian literature.
Books like The Hunger Games show the heroes revolting against the government. How is this showing us good citizenship?
It's showing good citizenship because in the books, the government is not treating the citizens in a way that they should be treated. It's a poor government, and they're just torturing their citizens. So by revolting, they are like saving one another, if that makes sense.
Have you read any dystopian fiction where the government is not the perpetrator of oppression, but some other institution or circumstance is? If so, what are these other causes of dystopia?
Can you repeat the first part of the question?
Yes. Have you read any dystopian fiction where the government is not the perpetrator of oppression, but some other institution or circumstance is?
Yes. One book I talked about, The Maze Runner, the government isn't the bad guy, so to speak. It's called Wicked, which stands for an acronym that has slipped my mind at the moment, but they are like a hospital-type organization. They're trying to find a cure to the disease that has been caused by the solar flares that I talked about, but they aren't doing it in the right way. And so, yeah, that's one book that I've read.
Dystopian fiction seems more popular today than it has been in the past. Why do you think, in particular, teenagers are more attracted to these stories today?
So I think that it's more popular today because it does have the main characters are almost always teenagers. And from what I've learned by reading them myself is that teenagers like reading stories about people their age saving the day. It just gives them, or it just makes them like feel good knowing that these characters can do these extraordinary things.
Do you believe that today's society is headed toward becoming dystopian? If so, how can we stop that?
So I do believe that it is possible, but I don't think at where we are now in our society that it's going to happen next year or anything. But in a way to stop it, like I've said in my thesis, is just going through all of these, like, not steps, I guess, but just by reading the books and figuring out how the books have, the characters in the books have done them wrong or done them right, and taking those steps and doing them in our own life.
Why should we learn about these points from novels when you can learn about them from government and Bible class?
So you can learn them from Bible class, yes, but I think that learning them from dystopian literature is just another way and another perspective to learn these lessons from.
Thank you, Morgan.
Thank you.